They deserve to get this vaccine first. And from there, you want to do tiering in various countries to make sure your most vulnerable populations get it. In our country, that would be Blacks and Native Americans, people with underlying health conditions, and the elderly. And so we need to look at as a globe, and we're involved with many European leaders and African leaders and others in Southeast Asia to make sure there's a purchasing fund that can pull that vaccine through when it's available and get it out in wide-scale distribution.
In fact, the testing could have been ramped up very quickly in a few countries that have almost avoided the epidemic entirely, like Taiwan, New Zealand, Australia. They took their experience and actually prepared, and so they moved a lot faster. So we'll have to prepare for the next one. That, I'd say is will get attention this time. Mm-hmm.
And seen new at 9 o'clock tonight, the Navajo Nation is now just reporting a handful of cases with no new deaths. And this is a trend that we have seen continuing. At the same time, there's talks about a vaccine study there on the tribal lands.
COVID-19 cases continue to hold steady on the Navajo Nation. Tribal leadership is working to keep cases from spiking again.
I have to reiterate, we're not out of the clear yet. There's no vaccine, there's no cure for COVID-19. And I just want our Navajo people to understand, yes, we're at an all-time low, but now's not the time to let up.
As COVID-19 vaccine trials begin, President Jonathan Nez wants to make sure people have the chance to be a part of the study to help other Native Americans. And he says, with flu season right around the corner, the Navajo Nation could get hit hard again.
Public health experts have said that catching the flu and catching COVID-19 at the same time is deadly. We're beginning to go out and offer flu shots. For those that want it, we're not going to force people to get flu shots.
As for a potential COVID vaccine, when there is a trial available on the Navajo Nation, it'll be done by the Johns Hopkins Center for American Indian Health.
And next Monday, Dr. Anthony Fauci is going to join President Nez for a town hall, and that's going to be at 9 o'clock in the morning on the Navajo Nation. That'll be 8 o'clock in the morning, Arizona time.
Here I found an article titled Kissinger Calls for a New World Order. This was back in April of this year. It says, among the works that first brought Henry Kissinger to academic acclaim was A World Restored, his 1950s book about how the greatest diplomats of Europe met at the Congress of Vienna to restore order to a continent shattered by the Napoleonic Wars. So he's just another NWO, satanic sellout here. He also has ties with Johns Hopkins University. Okay, so I found a tie between Johns Hopkins University and Henry Kissinger. They have what is called the Henry A. Kissinger Center for Global Affairs at Johns Hopkins SAIS. Okay, if nobody can see here what is going on, look at the keywords here. We have global, upheaval, international, what will wake people up to what is going on here?
There was a lot of experimental stuff that happened in Puerto Rico by the United States government. An individual in 1931 who was part of the Rockefeller Institute named Cornelius Rhodes, he blatantly boasted about the fact that he injected cancer into people. They call it research, of course, but he blatantly tells you how he felt. In a letter that he wrote, and he says he wrote it while he was drunk at a party, Puerto Ricans are beyond doubt the dirtiest, laziest, most degenerate, thievish race of men ever inhabiting this sphere. It makes you sick to inhabit the same island with them. They're even lower than Italians. What the island needs is not public health work, but a tidal wave or something to totally exterminate the population. It might then be livable. I have done my best to further the process of extermination by killing off 8 and transplanting cancer into several more. When confronted with the letter, as I mentioned, he said he wrote it while he was drunk. But the research of the Rockefellers in Puerto Rico involving cancer is something that you cannot erase from history. As if this wasn't enough, that's not the only type of population control tested in Puerto Rico. And by all means, I'm not saying that Puerto Rico is the only island where things have been tested. India has a lot of stuff that have been tested upon. Africa, the same. In the United States, there's a lot more being tested than you can think of involving vaccines and much, much more. But we're talking about the history of Puerto Rico. One such experiment that took place in Puerto Rico was involving the pharmaceutical industry yet again, involving birth control and in sterilization of Puerto Rican women. This test was also done in India, by the way. The goal was to ensure population control in Puerto Rico. Why? Because if you sterilize the women, they're going to have less babies, and less babies means less population, easier to control, but it's also, according to the people that promote it, good for the economy. In addition to that, the dangerous tests that took upon the Puerto Rican women involving birth control. The birth control that you see today sold all over the world. All over the world. Guess where it was tested for many years before it hit the market? Puerto Rico. In doses that were astronomically high. Why? Because it was being tested in Puerto Rico. Right? All of these things are history that we want to sweep under the rug, especially when speaking of the $70 billion debt that Puerto Rico has. Think about if Puerto Rico even had a little bit of the cut of birth control all around the world. We don't want to talk about that. Sad situation. Hear from someone who experienced it right now. This may be a 5-6 minute clip, but take a look.
The law allowing sterilization was passed precisely when women's labor was the only source of income for thousands of Puerto Rican families, and many women were forced to get sterilized. The fertility of women had great importance among the first inhabitants of Puerto Rico. Each of these fertility symbols represents 1% of the island's women of childbearing age. By 1946, 6.5% of all Puerto Rican women had been sterilized in government hospitals and private clinics.
And now our Caribbean report. Puerto Rico, a beautiful little island with a big problem. Today, April 30th, 1945, Chief of the U.S. Tariff Commission, Mr. Dorfman, has suggested the migration of 1 million Puerto Ricans as part of a plan to reduce the population problem on the island.
This migration was spontaneous inasmuch as the workers decided to migrate in search of jobs, but it was also planned. A confidential report by the island's government suggested in 1955 that 60,000 should leave. Shipping people out was, in effect, official policy. Production underwent rapid transformations during the 1940s. Operation Bootstrap, as the industrialization model was called, offered U.S. corporations tax-free operations, cheap labor, and handsome profits. Regarded by its planners as a showcase for prosperity and democracy, the new economic model further reduced the need for workers. This increased the so-called excess population.
It was known the number of jobs that Bootstrap was going to create would never be enough to occupy the people entering the labor force each year, so that from the beginning, the very earliest plans, it was very clear that a very intensive campaign promoting birth control, sterilization, and other forms of reducing birth were going to have to be put into place.
Tengo una hermana que se llama Felicita, que está operada. Tengo otra hermana que se llama Antonia, que está operada. Tengo otra hermana que se llama Francisca, que está operada. Y todas son esterilizadas para no tener baby. Una por causa y otras por no, pero toditas están operadas. Y ahora pues también así. Así que se acabará la familia, ¿verdad? No había mucho dinero. Pasaba mucho trabajo para uno ganarse sustento. Y el médico me dijo que no podía tener muchos hijos. Y pues entonces yo realicé o me puse, ¿verdad?, de acuerdo con mi marido y me operé. Me dijeron que yo le dijera a mi esposo que se operara a él, porque la operación para él era cuestión de un ratito y a él no le iba a afectar en nada, pero él no, porque mucha gente decía que el hombre pues cuando se opera pierde energía, ¿verdad? Y la energía pues no tengo que explicarla porque ya ustedes saben más o menos qué es, pero él no quiso. Yo dije, pues entonces pues me arriesgo yo.
No sabía que era la operación en sí, porque yo pensé que me hacían algo, pero que después, si yo quería, me la podían volver a reponer. Pero que en sí yo no supe bien lo que estaba pasando conmigo. Y mira, si es así, que después que a mí me operaron, a los 2 días vino un médico a pasar visita y puso el récord en mi cama. Y cuando él se dio la vuelta para ver otras pacientes, yo cogí el récord y lo leí. Y decía que me habían cortado y me habían cosido con hilo negro. Y yo decía, ay, Dios mío, que me habrán cortado. Bien ignorante, le decía, uno se sometía allí a que le hicieran lo que fuera. No fui obligada, déjame decirte que no fui obligada, yo fui por mi propia voluntad. Pero que si yo hubiera estado orientada, si alguien me hubiera orientado y me hubiera dicho, mira, hay otra forma de evitar que tú puedas tener niños, que tú los puedas tener cuando tú los deseas, pues mira, esa hubiera sido la solución, pero en ningún momento se me orientó. Y me siento triste porque yo soy una mujer joven y me siento bien joven y capacitada para tener otro hijo. Y en muchas ocasiones yo he estado en sitios que veo muchachas con barriga o que han tenido un baby y me da esa ansiedad.
Me esterilicé aquí en Utuado, en la clínica del doctor Pellegrina. Fue para el año 1949. Y como eso era lo que recomendaba uno, era la moda. Como pudiera pagar los 75 pesos, el doctor lo operaba. Una de las cosas que motivaba a uno, ¿verdad?, a tener una familia pequeña, era quizás los libros de texto que nos daban desde los primeros grados, donde nos enseñaban una familia pequeña y viviendo en una casa cómoda, una casa que en aquellos tiempos nosotros ni la habíamos visto, ¿verdad?, la gente en los campos. Y entonces pues ya uno estaba como acondicionado, ¿verdad?, para poder tener eso, pues la alternativa era operarse. Todo el mundo se hacía la propaganda uno a otro y uno a otro.
En 1953, el 17%, casi una quinta parte de las mujeres en edad de procrear, ya habían sido esterilizadas. Organización financiada por el millonario norteamericano Joseph Sonnen. Sonnen subvencionó 11.000 esterilizaciones y usó a las mujeres puertorriqueñas para probar su producto EMCO, una espuma anticonceptiva producida por su compañía.